Vintage Story has now announced that they are officially creating a spiritual successor to Hytale. If you don't remember, the day Hytale was cancelled, the head dev for Vintage Story, Tyron, who is a former Hypixel Studio developer, posted that he'd be looking to hire ex-Hytale devs or potentially passionate and talented Hytale fans to work on a spiritual successor to Hytale that would be worked in with the Vintage Story engine. He has now announced that that will be coming to us in the form of a new game mode as part of Vintage Story. In this announcement, he makes it seem like there were a lot of people who were applying, and he said that they'd be starting with a small team of 3 to 4 people, so that Vintage Story can afford to support this small team of people and then evaluate if they want to spend more once the project is officially revealed and starts to gather some interest. And then they also state that they're going to reuse a lot of the Vintage Story ecosystem, which is good because it takes apart a lot of the hard part about making a game like this. They say that the goal of the new mode would be depart significantly in aesthetics from Vintage Story, as well as setting and game mechanics. There would be more focus towards fantasy and adventure RPG compared to the gritty realism based nature of the current experience. He also says that personally he'd like some elves and dwarves in there, so maybe that's a sneak peek into our first couple factions, although with such a small team I'd say hoping for even factions at all, but especially factions as complex as the ones in Hytale were said to be, is a bit of a stretch, but maybe eventually down the road there can be a complex faction system. For the time being, this game would ship alongside Vintage Story at no additional cost. But in a purely hypothetical scenario where it really takes off, we could spin it into a fully separate game. This is good because at first, they're going to have a set of players who can already play the game for free because they already own Vintage Story, and they will be interested in this. And then it leaves the possibility for it to become its own game in the event it does well. So it leaves room to be the quote-unquote Minecraft killer, although that is a big hope for a team of 3 to 4 people, but it'll at least kind of stand alone on its own and doesn't necessarily have to just be, a spin-off to Vintage Story. He also says they'll be very open about it. Yay! More news! Release early, and the sub-team will be given significant agency over development direction and communication style with players. So it sounds like this is going to be a very hands-off approach, similar to the approach Riot took to Hypixel Studios, which is exciting, and hopefully the communication style is a lot of communication and a lot of player input. He then goes on to say that there will be some areas where the goals of both teams align, and both projects will benefit, such as combat, improved enemy AI, or better NPCs in general. So again, he's showing a willingness here to work some aspects of this game into Vintage Story, and to work some aspects of Vintage Story into this new spin-off, which is very exciting because it means that both games will benefit, like he said, at half the price. And also areas which they focus more on in the adventure mode, such as combat, as he mentions here, will get improved, and then that'll show some kickback onto the Vintage Story, which maybe isn't as focused on combat, but it's still nice to have that improved combat system. And then he clarifies that everything about Vintage Story will remain true to its original vision, so that game's not going to change much with this development, which is fantastic. He also says that in the off chance the community's not interested in this project, they'll keep the option open to pivot to make Vintage Story better instead. So then that goes back to the combat, improved AI, etc. And then they'll just work that into Vintage Story if this project fails. Either way, they'll try to deliver something worth our time. He also read through some forests and posted an update to the blog later. So first one, it's a bad name for a new project, that being Vintage Story Adventure Mode. And Tyron says, I agree, we'll rename it something better. That'll probably come close to when they have enough to at least show, in the form of a trailer or something that announces the full name. He also addresses concerns that they're not focusing enough on the core Vintage Story game, where he says they don't want the need to get too much bigger because they're struggling on the management side, which, again, something we saw with Hytale is they got too big too fast, and then they didn't know how to handle that, and everything slowed down to a grinding halt, which significantly affected game development. They're trying to avoid that scenario with Vintage Story. And then he said the same thing applies to spending that money on Vintage Story instead. He says that this would run fully independent of him, and by and large it seems like the Vintage Story community was not aggressively happy, or at least the portion of the community he decided to address was not extremely happy about this announcement. However, I assure you, the Hytale community is very excited to see this game, and this could bring a lot of new fans into Vintage Story. So yeah, all in all, this is a very exciting announcement from the developers of Vintage Story, I will be looking into this project once it gets formally announced. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it was quite a while before it does get announced, because they've got to hire these people, and then these 3 to 4 people have to all meet each other, decide on their direction, start making art, start making gameplay mechanics, etc, etc. So it could be quite a while before we see any of the fruits of this project. That being said, it's an exciting development, and it's nice to know that even if Simon Hypixel does not manage to save Hytale, there will at least be a project that delivers something similar, although how good that is remains to be seen. Goodbye, I'll try to keep you updated on all of the news from this game, from Simon Hypixel, and I'm gonna try to start covering Everwind in a couple weeks, and until next time, stay happy.